Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition. And we're going to talk about the Dungeon Master bullet point problem, Arbiter. Okay? Now, my apologies. Yeah, if you do not know what the Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master bullet point problem is, you got a little bit of homework to do. You have to go into the doobly-doo below. There's a video that will give you context to understand this video. Apologies for that. I wish everything could be freestanding, but there's a lot of repetition in that, which is not fun for everybody. Here we go. All right. Arbiter. What is an arbiter? An arbiter is someone who does arbitration, which is a discipline. Arbiter is a role. I'm going to talk about it at the role level, but dungeon masters have to master arbitration. Now, you know who masters arbitration? Like FBI agents, like CIA agents, like arbitration. Oh, and also like a significant number of corporate, executives, and like this is a major discipline. This is not the shallow end of the pool. This is like very, very serious. This is an incredibly complex discipline. But you're a dungeon master. So what other people get to spend an entire lifetime mastering just one discipline, you have 10 disciplines to master, okay? So let's talk about arbitration and the arbitration that the dungeon master arbiter has to accomplish. There's a lot. Holy cows. There's so many ways that conflicts can happen between player characters, okay? And guess what? Conflicts can even happen between dungeon masters and players. And I'm not even talking about that today, right? I'm just literally and get this. You could even have conflicts that come external to the game during the game, right? Especially if you have any kind of an FLGS or a library game or a public space game. Even if you have your own home, right? Like, spouses and siblings and, children walk by, and there can be conflicts even between, like, there's so many places where conflict can erupt with the real people in the real game. And arbitration is very serious. But let's keep it focused on just the conflicts that can happen between player characters, right? So first of all, there's the very constant source of conflict, which is treasure, right? Treasure is a huge part of Dungeons & Dragons. Magical treasure, gems, gold, silver, copper, like even mundane objects can be quite valuable, right? Like if they're masterwork, right? Pieces of art, maps, like these are like, and even like a map, completely non-magical, just a piece of paper, right? But if you're on Faerun and you got a map of Eberron, that's worth a fortune, right? Like, and that could be used by some evil wizard to plan an assault across dimensions, right? Like a single piece of paper can have immense value, right? And the reality is this has gotten so contentious in games that I've had in the past that one of the things I do is when I give out treasure in my game, it goes onto one character sheet, right? And I'm telling, basically they've learned, right, that possession is 9/10 of the law, my players, right? And they're like, they know that these things go. And one thing is I'm like, hey, I'm the dungeon master. This is a piece of treasure I'm giving you, right? If it goes on one of your sheets, you guys have it. If it doesn't go on one of your sheets, you don't have it, right? It's left at the scene, right? And they are, they're there and they want to, and so basically they also realize that, in my game, there are stop points where when you go to Neverwinter, that is a major place, right? So if you have a magic item, you can very commonly trade it for a magic item of another type at the same rarity level. I almost always allow that, right? So that, even though you get a powerful magic item that might have nothing to do with your character, right? That that basically you can trade that for something that will be very valuable to your character once you get into Neverwinter, right? And it gives a reason for people to go into the big cities, right? So and Waterdeep as well, right? It gives, and when they're in Waterdeep, they can do things they can't do. They can switch out, magic items that they've gotten, right? So one of the other things is, I actually did a video about this before, but I'll actually mention it real quick here. There was a brutal confrontation that happened in one of my friends' games where he was playing a paladin and a holy avenger came into the game, and there was a massive and the dungeon master put it into a treasure trove, right? And and the paladin was like, oh, thank goodness, it's been so long, I finally have a holy avenger. And one of the other player characters was like, slow your roll there, man, I'm going to take that and I'm going to trade it. I know it fits your character, but once we get into a major city, I can switch this for another item, right? I can switch this for another magical item. I could trade it for something that I need, right? Like an Ioun stone or anything like that, right? And my friend, who's the paladin, was furious. He was really angry, and really considered dropping out of the game, and asked me. He was like, I'm so mad that the DM allowed this. And I talked to the DM afterwards, and he said that he never would have guessed that one of the other player characters would take it, right? That he assumed everybody in the party would be like, oh yeah, of course the paladin should get the holy avenger, right? And so now I've taken some notes right there, and one of the things is, if I want a specific player character to have a specific magic item, I have a scene where some non-player character literally puts it in their hands and says, this is bequested to you, so that no other schmuck in your party can get it. You're like, okay, yeah, I get it. But people can very much fight over treasure, right? And that's an extension of the real world. I have a friend he's just become an executor of a will, and it's absolute nightmare. It's a nightmare, right? Splitting up wealth in virtually or physically is nightmarish, right? Where else can you get fights, right? Here's the 1 in 100 day situation. You got players at your tables, right? And 99 days out of 100, they're fine, right? But if you've got a game that goes 4 months, you're gonna hit day 100, right? And they may have just a really bad day, right? And they may be frustrated or angry, right? And this is shocking to me, right? And it's the game is Dungeons and Dragons is Dungeons and Dragons, right? It is what it is. I wish there was a mechanism to tell people, if a player character is rolling against a player character, your game has failed, right? And I struggle so hard to make sure that I put enough NPC villains in my game and make the environment so dangerous that the player character says, I ain't got time to fight my player character brethren, right, and sisterin. I just ain't got time for it, because I got to deal with the very dangerous villains that Scott Garibay has put into this game to slay me, right? I don't have time for infighting, right? But it happens, and there are times where a player character could get to the point where they are actually plotting and then actually executing the murder of another player character, right? And if you go here, man, that is major conflict, right? So you could have major conflicts at your table, and you, as the dungeon master, are on point to be fair and to be an arbiter and to make sure. Now, you know what an arbiter is? An arbiter is someone who ends conflicts based on their authority, okay? That's what a dungeon master is, right? But when you end conflict, you need to do it in a fair manner where everybody feels heard, everybody feels that fairness has been brought forward. You are a judge. You are arbiter. You are the determiner. You are the declaration of justice at your table. Arbitration is not small. It is massive. It is massive, right? The other issue is you might have arbitration. You might have to be an arbiter in IRL. This is crazy, right? Just all kinds of things can come into just stomp on your game, right? And so one of the things that can happen is often people play with their friends or they play with associates, right? And those associates are connected in different ways. They may work together. They may be working on projects together outside of Dungeons and Dragons or outside of your Dungeons and Dragons game, and those things could go south. You could have two people who are working on a novel together, right? And one person was supposed to turn in their chapter this week so that the other person could do their chapter, and now the whole project's halted, right? And you have tension between two players at your table, right? And it has nothing to do with your Dungeons and Dragons game, but you need to be the arbiter, and that may mean you need to make peace with your players outside the table, literally arbitrating between your players when the table isn't even in scope, right? And why? Because this is something that has become important to you, and you have invested a year and a half of your life, and you're moving toward, and you're 4 sessions away from the end of the campaign, right? And you need those players to have peace, and you need them at the table so that 2 other people who aren't fighting, right, that they didn't waste a year and a half of their life getting to the end of a campaign that never happens, which is constantly happening in Dungeons and Dragons. The average campaign ends after 6 sessions. Could you imagine 2 players fighting IRL, right? And it costing 2 of your players who are peaceful and kind and tolerant and are great players at the table and great people in IRL, and they're going to get cost having all players there and having a very cool and very gratifying completion of a year and a half campaign. Very, very real, right? So arbitration is major. You can have fights over treasure. You can have the 1 in 100 problem. You have a great player, but they roll in one day and they are an absolute nightmarish terror, right? And they are beset to put the smackdown on another player character for XYZ reason, which probably has nothing to do with the actual game, right? You can have players who are fighting in IRL, and if you're deep into a campaign, you might need to fix that IRL problem. And this is what I'm saying, right? If you are a real dungeon master, you've been here, right? You know what this is like. And so the idea that you would have to go fix problems in the real world for a game, air quotes, it's not a game. It's a life path. No one should be called to this lightly. The idea that calling someone to be a dungeon master is a small, non-epic request is ludicrous. Okay? All that's my opinion. Love to hear your thoughts.